Hi, everyone. We're Group 7, and we represented Chapter 2, Labor Unions, Good or Bad. I'm McKenna Hammond.
I'm Jacob Martin.
I'm Jillian Nijinsky.
I'm Lucas Saunders.
And I'm Devin Seaman.
What is a labor union? A labor union is an organization that acts as an intermediary between its members and the business that employs them. The main purpose of a labor union is to give workers the power to negotiate for more favorable working conditions and other benefits through collective bargaining. There are many opinions regarding the topic of whether labor unions are good or bad for workers. From the second chapter in our book, Table 2.2 shows the 4 schools of thought about labor unions. Mainstream economics believe that labor unions are bad because monopolies benefit a few at the expense of everyone else. Human resource management believes that labor unions are necessary because they think effective management policies are best and that labor unions add unproductive conflict. Industrial relations believe that labor unions are important because it is necessary to counter corporate bargaining powers to balance efficiency, equality, and voice in democratic capitalist societies. Critical industrial relations believe that labor unions are important but inadequate. They stated one key vehicle for aiding labor's struggle against capitalists and for protecting workers, but because of capitalism's inherent imbalances, greater sociopolitical challenges are needed for a true reform. It has been proven that unions help working people broadly. Throughout the pandemic, union members have increasingly grown within the US workforce. Unions have helped to secure benefits for workers during the pandemic, such as additional pay, health and safety measures, paid sick days, and job preservation. More than 1 in 9 workers are covered by a union contract, and more than half of workers are covered by a union contract have an associate's degree or more education.
Reasons why human resources would provide the employee with a voice. Some of these reasons can include to learn about employee ideas for improved productivity and quality, to improve employee satisfaction and loyalty, providing a substitute for a union, and decentralizing decision-making to make the workplace more democratic. Workplace governance. Workplace governance is the method for ruling the workplace. The method of workplace governance determines the power structure within the workplace. Depending on what the workplace governance is, it will sway whether the organization feels the need to unionize or not. There are 5 workplace governance methods. 1, competitive labor markets. Rules determined by competition between firms and competition between employees. This method promotes efficiency and protects against employee abuse. Human resource management. Rules determined by human resource managers with contribution from employees. This method aligns the goals of the employer with the employee and promotes equity and a voice. Worker control. Rules determined by workers themselves. This method has workers' interests being met by having the workers control them. Number 4, independent employee representation. Rules are determined jointly by having employers and employees collectively bargain. This method allows both sides to be involved in decision-making while equalizing power between each other. Number 5, government regulation. Determine rules through legislators or government agencies. This method establishes a uniform standard, not set by the market, the managers, or the employees. One way to decide which system is best is to ask yourself a series of questions, then follow the model 2.5 found in our book. Some of these questions include, is labor just a commodity? Are employers and employees equals in a competitive market? Is there an inherent conflict of interest between employers and employees? Is voice important? History of United States solutions to workplace governance. The US thought during the 1800s and 1900s was primarily in line with the laissez-faire views. As a result, few laws were passed to come between economic relationships, including employer and employee. During the Great Depression in the 1930s, many people began to lose faith in laissez-faire. This led to a new era of beliefs that employment relationships are best resolved through collective bargaining, which was led by President Roosevelt's New Deal. Post-war policies began to go against the New Deal policies, putting power back into the employer's hand. And by the latter part of the 20th century, human resource model became dominant due to safety nets that were put in place. This shows the practical relevance of the different schools of thought, given the different perspectives of that time.
Yes, so what Jacob just previously covered, these are the three fundamental assumptions. The first one being, is labor just a commodity? The second assumption being whether or not employees and employers are equals in competitive labor markets. And the third assumption being, what is the nature of conflict between employers and employees? And now these assumptions also guide me into my next slide, which is the underlying causes that lead us into making these assumptions. These are described as the four causes of labor problems, which are market failure, poor management, unequal bargaining power, and domination of labor by the capitalist class. So although labor unions are known to limit these labor problems, most people do not see them in the same way. These are the four schools of thought when talking about labor unions, which McKenna covered previously in the presentation. The first thought being mainstream economics. This is the thought that labor unions are bad because monopolies are able to benefit at the expense of everyone else. The second school of thought comes from human resource management, who believes the labor unions are unnecessary in the sense that they just add unproductive conflict. They believe effective management policies work much better. The third school of thought would be industrial relations. They believe that labor unions are very important in the sense that they provide an effective way of countering corporate bargaining, which creates a sense of balancing power within the organization. And the last school of thought being critical industrial relations, who believe although labor unions are important, they're inadequate. Now, in my opinion, labor unions do a great job of allowing workers' voices to be heard, but their voice should also be used as an HR strategy. It never hurts getting your employees' ideas or how you can improve productivity, quality, and even cost savings. This can also lead to an increase of employee satisfaction and loyalty, and can even provide a more democratic workplace environment.
Okay, and what United States unions do? Unions provide protection, participation, equity, and voice among workers, and it really creates like a sense of community and helps workers feel like they have more of a voice within their company. The four schools of thought in the labor problem discussion reveal that evaluation of labor unions depend on the nature of work, how labor markets operate, and the nature of employee relationships and what conflicts arise, and the importance of the employee's voice. As my classmates have previously covered, mainstream economics, human resource management, industrial relations, and critical industrial relations all hold different views on what unions are and whether they're beneficial or not. So it really depends on what company you work for and what general direction they go whenever it comes to unions. They are critical to solving labor problems collectively, especially whenever there's a lot of different issues going on. It can help to have more of a community to figure everything out. Bargaining collectively is needed to match corporate bargaining power. If the two don't match, then a decision can't be made, and there really needs to be an equal balance between the two. Okay, evaluating unions. Union workers on average do have 15% higher wages compared to non-union workers, and it is believed that they do have better health benefits too, around like 15%. Okay, unions increase the likelihood of employee benefits, senior rights, and discipline and discharge provisions. It kind of just helps keep order and keep everything organized within the company. Whenever there's a shock effect present, a shock effect really impacts managers out of compliance and forces them to develop better managerial practices and policies. This could be whenever like employees are kind of having like a turnover and they're demanding better management and better policies of their company. The overall result on unions is pretty mixed on their effectiveness. It can be very beneficial or it could be really bad. It really just kind of depends on the work environment. Okay, theories of the labor movement. A labor movement is a social movement in which workers, unions from multiple workplaces join together to pursue common interests, most frequently in political and social arenas. And this really helps provide a political voice for workers as well, because unions can have a political voice. It's not always just social. In many countries, labor unions are closely tied to political parties. Examples would be the Labour Party in Great Britain or the Workers' Party in Brazil. Mainstream economics, they believe whenever labor movements happen, it's more political activities are seen of the use of power to benefit union workers at the expense of others. Critical industrial relations, they believe labor movements are active in the political and social arenas, and they are vital for countering the dominant power of employees. Some labor movements view themselves as agents of radical reform, especially in like the political arena, and important organizations in civil society. And the pluralist perspective, labor movements make important contributions in the political and civil arenas in contemporary democratic societies.
Yeah, so I'm going to go into the 3 key mainstream economic assumptions and 3 of their alternatives. So first, the standard economic model assumes goods and services are private, but the alternative to this is that some aspects of the workplace are public goods. So not everything's private. The second one, mobility and transaction costs are assumed to be 0, which once again, this isn't always the case. And the alternative is that anyone who relies on their jobs but are not able to quit in positions that aren't unionized, because there's so many of those. And then workers are purely rational, which, as we all know, people aren't always rational. And if that's not the case, then trust, communication, respect, and fairness become way more important. So labor unions, when the alternative assumptions are accurate. Having a collective voice mechanism internalizes both costs and benefits of workplace goods, and this solves the free rider issue, which is employees acting on their own, talking to management about their own personal gain instead of for the community. Employment conditions determined by bargaining, not market and market workers. Management's really looking to satisfy the median worker and satisfy 50% because then those people would be happy. And then lastly, regular consultation between management and union provides an easy path for employees to express issues. And then this improves self-worth and dignity because it makes employees more confident when they're going to talk to management than they would if they were just going to act on themselves. And then lastly, the 2 economic faces of labor unions. So there was 2 discussed in the chapter. One was the monopoly face, where unions can raise wages for their members above the competitive level because they're really forcing the hand of the employers. Because like if your whole union wants higher wages, they can't really say anything about that unless they just want to get a bunch of scabs to take over their positions. And then the collective voice institutional response phase is using their voice to improve outcomes for workers and employees and really just looking out for the greater good of the individuals. And then at the end of the case was kind of saying that they're using a combination of both faces has been shown to be most effective when it comes to union management. So.
Okay, and some key terms about the chapter to wrap up. Mainstream economics is economic activity of self-interested agents such as firms and workers and competitive markets. Human Resource Management School believes that labor problems stem from poor management. Industrial Relations School believes that management employees have different interests that motivate them and that animate them in the workplace. Critical Industrial Relations School, capitalist institutions don't simply exist but are created by society. Dominant groups design and control institutions to serve their own interests, imperfectly due to resistance from competing groups. Unitarist view of conflict. Conflict isn't seen as an inherent feature of the employment relationship. Conflict is seen as a manifestation of poor human resource management policies or interpersonal clashes between employees. The pluralist view of conflict. Some interests are shared, both employees and employers want their organization to be successful, but other issues, there are inherent conflict of interest between employees and employers. The class conflict, from a critical perspective, employee conflict isn't about higher wages or better benefits. It's about social conflict or unequal power relations.
Alrighty, and then the two discussion questions that we came up with are, do you think labor unions are good or bad? And do you think labor unions benefited workers enough throughout the pandemic? Thank you.